Nancy Pelosi dismissed him as a small-town church lawyer from Shreveport who had absolutely no business lecturing the United States Congress about the complexities of Wall Street. She delivered this assessment with a practiced, razor-thin smile, the precise kind of smile that had quietly ended political careers, launched sweeping congressional investigations, and raised upwards of $400 million in campaign donations over 35 years. It was the expression of an apex predator signaling to the room that she had already won, and was now merely selecting the most gracious method of demonstrating it. With all due respect to the speaker, she began, her tone dripping with polished condescension. I'm not sure a man who spent his career writing legal briefs for churches in Louisiana is the right person to explain financial markets to this committee. Some of us have actually governed. The gallery emitted a palpable gasp. The seasoned journalist lining the press row instantly scribbled notes, and her deputy chief of staff, Marcus, seated dutifully behind her, allowed himself a micro-fraction of a satisfied breath. It was the quiet exhalation of a political operative who had meticulously observed the morning's rehearsal and was profoundly pleased that the live execution had landed perfectly on beat. Yet, Mike Johnson offered no immediate reaction. He did not lock eyes with Pelosi, nor did he reach out to adjust his microphone. He refrained from shifting uncomfortably in his leather chair, clearing his throat, or performing any of the involuntary physical negotiations a person typically defaults to when they have been publicly diminished and are frantically calculating a path to recovery. Instead, he simply placed his hand flat upon a binder. It was noticeably thick, heavily tabbed with the cheap, brightly colored plastic dividers that high school teachers purchase in bulk at Office Depot every August, the specific variety that comes in standard packs of 8 and persistently refuses to lie perfectly flat. It fundamentally represented the meticulous tool of a man who had once spent his evenings grading exams at a cramped kitchen table and who had never truly abandoned the disciplined ethos of that table. Madam Speaker, he finally articulated, his voice stripped of defensive timbre. I appreciate the introduction, you're right. I did start in churches, not on Wall Street. And before the churches, I was a teacher. I taught for a few years before law school. And in my experience, the best way to know whether someone has truly learned the lesson is not to listen to what they say afterward. It's to look at what they did when they thought no one was grading. With deliberate precision, Johnson opened the oversized binder to the very first brightly colored tab. I've been grading, he announced, the statement hanging heavily in the suddenly suffocating air of the committee room. He began to read aloud, his cadence steady and unrelenting. One entry, one date, the 17th of June, 2021. Stock, NVIDIA. Instrument, call options. Value, $1 million to $5 million. Purchased by Paul Pelosi. 16 days later, the CHIPS and Science Act, $52 billion in semiconductor subsidies, moved directly to the Senate floor. Slowly, deliberately, Johnson lifted his gaze to meet the room. His voice retained the exact same rhythm, projecting the chilling patience of a veteran educator returning a spectacularly failed examination. When I was teaching, if a student turned in an exam with the exact same answers as the student sitting immediately next to him, I wouldn't rush to call it cheating. Not the first time, he explained, projecting an aura of lethal calm. I'd call it a coincidence. He placed his hand firmly and flatly against the surface of the dense binder. This binder, Johnson stated, the silence around him amplifying every syllable, has 47 coincidences. Across the expansive desk, Nancy Pelosi's facial expression remained completely unaltered. In the cutthroat arena of Washington politics, that very lack of reaction was the ultimate tell. In a massive hearing room packed with seasoned operatives and lawmakers whose faces had just involuntarily shifted, her face betrayed absolutely nothing. It ruthlessly maintained the flawless composure of a seasoned political titan who has spent nearly 4 decades commanding rooms where revealing nothing is the singular defense that has never failed her. But in this hyper-scrutinized moment, That legendary defense mechanism was failing not because it visibly cracked, but precisely because it did not. The sheer, unnatural steadiness, the absolute architectural stillness of her expression became the glaring focal point the entire room could painfully observe. A face that intensely composed is universally recognized as a face that acutely knows it requires immediate composing. Seated directly behind her, Marcus urgently engaged his smartphone. He unlocked the device, frantically locked it, and immediately unlocked it again. The illuminated screen remained starkly empty, yet he obsessively checked it anyway, his political instincts screaming that a catastrophe was unfolding. Returning to his meticulously organized evidence, Johnson turned to the next page. Part 1, he announced, establishing an inescapable pedagogical framework. Before I go through the rest of this binder, I want to make absolutely sure everyone in this room is reading from the exact same textbook, because the system we're about to discuss today is not complicated. The system is, in fact, incredibly simple. And I firmly believe that this inherent simplicity is actually a core part of the problem. He deliberately bypassed Pelosi, intentionally ignored the glaring red lights of the broadcast cameras, and focused entirely on the elected members seated along the elevated arc of mahogany chairs behind their polished nameplates. The powerful individuals who, in theory, drafted the rules and who in practice aggressively traded under them. There are 3 fundamental things you need to understand. Johnson instructed the room. I'm going to explain them exactly the way I used to explain supply and demand to high school 11th graders clearly once, and then we are immediately moving on. He raised a single index finger. 1, the congressional calendar. Every single elected member of this legislative body has privileged access to the internal legislative schedule weeks or sometimes months before the general public. We intrinsically know which specific bills are coming to committee, which are advancing to markup, and which are heading for a final floor vote. That critical information is not strictly classified, but it is certainly not public in real time. It is the highly guarded schedule of a building that 535 people intimately share, and that 330 million everyday Americans fundamentally do not. He then held up 2 fingers, 2 call options. A call option gives a trader the legal right to purchase a stock at a rigidly fixed price within a highly specific time period. If the underlying stock goes up, you secure a massive profit. If it unfortunately goes down, you lose only the premium. Call options are the preferred financial instrument for a person who already knows precisely which direction a stock is guaranteed to move. They technically represent a bet, but they are only a true gamble if you don't already possess the answer key. Finally, he raised 3 fingers. 3, the disclosure window. Under the current parameters of the Stock Act, elected members and their spouses are legally required to publicly disclose their stock trades within 45 days. That means the American public officially finds out about a highly lucrative trade a full month and a half after it was actively executed. By that late date, the relevant bill is already passed, the target stock has predictably moved, and the resulting profit has been quietly collected. The mandatory disclosure doesn't actually prevent a single thing. It's merely a receipt for an expensive meal that has already been eaten. Johnson calmly folded his hands upon the desk, his voice maintaining its methodical tempo. So, the operational sequence is clear. Know the calendar, buy the option, wait for the vote, sell immediately after the price moves. File the disclosure paperwork 44 days later. By the time the general public finally sees the paperwork, the semester is completely over and the final grades have already been posted. He shifted his steady gaze directly back to Nancy Pelosi. Now, let's look at the grades. Sensing the narrative slipping, Pelosi immediately leaned into her gooseneck microphone. "Mr. Speaker," she interjected, her tone laced with practiced indignation. Before we proceed, and I certainly welcome a full and fair discussion of this vital issue, I want to clearly note for the official record that members of both political parties actively engage in stock trading. In fact, Republican members actually outpaced Democratic members in total trading volume last year. If we're going to seriously examine this system, let's examine it fully and comprehensively, not selectively. It was a textbook, impeccably timed deflection. Johnson, however, simply nodded in quiet agreement. The Congresswoman is absolutely right. He conceded smoothly, dismantling her partisan shield. Members of both parties unequivocally trade. I've said it publicly, and I will say it again right here on the record. I fully support a complete, uncompromising ban on individual stock trading by all members of Congress and their spouses. Both parties. Absolutely no exceptions. I sincerely mean that. He allowed a heavy pause to descend upon the room, the deliberate silence of a teacher who has acknowledged a student's technically valid point and is preparing to explain why it doesn't change the assignment. But Johnson continued, this specific hearing is explicitly called Restoring Public Trust. The Congresswoman herself personally chose that sweeping title. And public trust fundamentally doesn't start with the people who are currently the least trusted in our society. It mathematically must start with the people who boldly ask for that trust the loudest. The Congresswoman has repeatedly asked for the American public's trust more loudly, far more frequently, and for significantly more years than any other living member of this legislative body. So, I'm deliberately starting the investigation right here, not because it's partisan, but because it's logical. Pelosi's defensive counterattack had been undeniably legitimate in its factual basis. Yet, Johnson had flawlessly absorbed the blowhole, loudly endorsed the core principle behind it, and then weaponized the hearing's own grandiose title to definitively explain exactly why that same principle led directly back to the powerful woman who had convened the hearing. She had handed him a partisan shield, and he had politely declined to cower behind it, handing it right back to her with devastating consequences. She fiercely resolved not to repeat that mistake. In the row behind her, Marcus quickly typed a single, urgent word into a highly encrypted text message directed to Pelosi's personal crisis attorney, Binder. He added absolutely nothing else. The single word alone was terrifyingly enough. Part 2, Johnson announced, his vocal modulation refusing to shift a fraction of a decibel. I want to tell you about a hardworking woman named Linda Nakamura. Linda is 59 years old. She teaches introductory and advanced economics at Lincoln High School in San Francisco, which happens to be squarely within the Congresswoman's home district. She's been a dedicated teacher for 31 grueling years. 31 long years of early first period classes, endless lesson planning, and intense AP economics review sessions on early Saturday mornings. For all of this, she currently makes $78,000 a year. He turned to peer directly into the blinking lens of the central broadcast camera. Now, $78,000 might sound like a decent salary until you realize that Linda resides in San Francisco, a city where the median home price sits at an astonishing $1.3 million. She rents a modest studio apartment. She maintains a standard retirement account, a 403B, prudently invested in a reliable Vanguard index fund. After 31 relentless years of disciplined contributions, her entire life's retirement account is worth approximately $340,000. Returning to his physical evidence, Johnson opened the binder, located a specific tab, and read, last year, Linda's steadfast index fund successfully earned an 11% return, a good year. She excitedly called her adult daughter and said, 11%, maybe I'll be able to retire before I hit 70. He methodically turned a single page. During that exact same 12-month period, Paul Pelosi's elite investment portfolio earned an astronomical return of approximately 65%. The speaker's husband, aggressively investing in volatile individual tech stocks that repeatedly and miraculously preceded major congressional legislative action directly affecting those exact same companies, earned a staggering 6 times what a 31-year veteran economics teacher earned investing in the broad market. He definitively closed that specific tab. Linda and the speaker's husband were allegedly playing the exact same game, operating within the exact same market, navigating the exact same American economy over the exact same 12 months. Yet, the massive discrepancy was absolutely not due to superior skill, exhaustive financial research, or blind luck. The defining difference was simply a matter of a seat, specifically which powerful seat you currently sit in, what classified information you can clearly see from that elevated vantage point, and precisely what massive positions you can execute before the everyday people trapped in the lower seats can even see what legislative action is barreling toward them. He paused briefly, his fingertips gently resting on the spine of the binder. 2 years ago, one of Linda's brightest students, a high school junior named Kevin, asked her a highly specific question in the middle of class. He asked, "Mrs. Nakamura, if elected members of Congress can secretly see what lucrative bills are coming down the pipeline before anyone else, and they use that knowledge to buy massive amounts of stock in the exact companies those bills will help, isn't that essentially just insider trading with extra steps?" And Linda humbly told me that she stood there at the front of her classroom, an honored 31-year teaching veteran, and she embarrassingly did not have a good, honest answer for him. I would very much like to formally give Kevin his definitive answer today. If this esteemed committee will allow me the requisite time, I would like to meticulously go through this evidence binder and officially provide the undeniable answer that his dedicated teacher simply could not. Without pausing for permission, Johnson rapidly flipped the heavy pages to tab 1. Part 3 he initiated, stripping the presentation of any flowery framing, the 21st of January 2021. Paul Pelosi aggressively purchases massive call options on Alphabet, Google's parent corporate entity, valued somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. At that exact time, the formidable House Judiciary Committee, on which the Congresswoman prominently served as a highly influential senior member, is actively preparing aggressive, market-moving antitrust hearings, specifically targeting Alphabet. Purchasing call options is a leverage bet that a stock's price will go up. Placing a massive bet on Alphabet right in the middle of an escalating antitrust investigation is a highly confident bet that the impending investigation will ultimately result in absolutely no meaningful legislative action. He coldly flipped the page. The investigation did not result in any meaningful action. The stock surged. He moved flawlessly to the next flag. Tab 2, the 19th of March, 2021. Paul Pelosi decisively purchases 15,000 shares of Visa at approximately $150 per share. Total transaction value, approximately $2.25 million. At that exact moment, critical legislation that would strictly cap Visa's lucrative interchange fees is quietly pending before the powerful Financial Services Committee. If the bill conveniently stalls, Visa's dominant market position remains totally secure. Another deliberate page turn echoed in the quiet room. The crucial legislation stalled. Visa's stock held its ground. Paul Pelosi's massive position gained immense value. The cadence was punishing. Tab 3, the 17th of June, 2021. Paul Pelosi boldly exercises call options on NVIDIA valued anywhere from $1 million to $5 million. Exactly 16 days later, the highly lucrative Chips and Science Act miraculously advances. I want to loudly mention it again specifically because of the chosen financial instrument, call options. That is the incredibly aggressive instrument a seasoned trader actively chooses when they absolutely know the precise direction a stock will move, and they want to maximally leverage that guaranteed outcome. Johnson abruptly closed tab 3, placing his hand firmly back on the binder. I currently possess 44 more, identically damning examples. I will purposely not read all of them aloud today. Not because they don't deeply matter, but because they quite literally all say the exact same thing. Different dates, different corporate stocks, different pieces of legislation, but they strictly adhere to the exact same indefensible pattern. The lucrative financial trade always precedes the critical legislative action every single time. 47 distinct times, the massive stock purchase perfectly preceded the decisive congressional vote. Reaching beside the binder, he dramatically produced a single sheet of paper featuring 2 unyielding columns, trade dates strictly on the left, corresponding market-moving legislative events glaringly on the right. He placed it squarely on the witness table and deliberately rotated it for the broadcast camera. I'm not even going to read from it. The irrefutable dates are the entire argument. If the distinguished Congresswoman would sincerely like to try and explain away any individual entry, I wholeheartedly welcome that explanation. He waited, letting the silence stretch into an eternity. Pelosi, visibly strained, did not attempt to explain a single entry. She slowly reached out for her glass of iced water, brought the rim to her tightly pursed lips, and methodically set it back down without actually drinking a single drop. Beneath the heavy mahogany table, Marcus frantically texted his 3-word inquiry to Pelosi's high-priced attorney. How many tabs? 19 agonizing seconds later. How many what? Marcus rapidly fired back. Tabs in the binder. Colored tabs. After 40 excruciating seconds of typing bubbles, the lawyer finally asked, does she have counter documents? Marcus glanced bleakly at Pelosi's immaculate desk setup. The meticulously prepared 60-page defensive dossier sat there, completely useless. It addressed absolutely none of Paul Pelosi's individual trades. Marcus stared at his phone and grimly typed a single defeated word. Number Part 4, Johnson stated, escalating the structural demolition. Everything I've shown you so far is a matter of strict public record. You can look up every entry tonight. Now, I want to pivot and talk about exactly what the sanitized public record doesn't conveniently show. He retrieved a distinctly thin folder conspicuously lacking the cheap plastic tabs. The Congresswoman has emphatically stated on multiple public occasions that she absolutely does not discuss confidential legislative business with her husband. Her exact words, I don't discuss my legislative work with my husband. He makes his own investment decisions. I genuinely have no reason to disbelieve that definitive statement. Therefore, I want to deeply understand exactly how this miraculously profitable system currently works if that statement is actually completely true. He slid a newly uncovered document onto the polished table. This is an internal, highly sensitive scheduling memo pulled directly from the Speaker's inner office, definitively dated April 2021. The memo contains the standard, highly guarded, weekly legislative preview. However, right here at the bottom, there is a fascinating paragraph explicitly labeled Scheduling Notes. It clearly reads, CHIPS markup moved to Thursday. Tech antitrust postponed to following week. Note, Speaker personal calendar shows Tuesday dinner with P, no scheduling conflict, but flagging per standing instruction. He laid the paper down gently, letting the revelation detonate. The memo strictly does not say, inform Paul about the impending CHIPS markup. It simply says flagging per standing instruction. But if a senior congressional staff member is under strict orders to proactively cross-reference the highly sensitive internal legislative calendar against the Speaker's private, personal dinners with her husband. What exactly is the true underlying purpose of that highly specific instruction? What is being relentlessly flagged? And more importantly, for whom? Before the shock could dissipate, he produced a second devastating document. This is an official memo from a premier financial advisory firm sent directly to Paul Pelosi, clearly dated March 2021, exactly 3 weeks before the massive Visa stock purchase. There is one single highly revealing line highlighted here. Given the current legislative environment, we strongly recommend increasing exposure to established payment networks. Timing: strictly before committee activity resumes post-recess. Johnson locked his eyes onto the lens. The specific phrase I want to intensely focus on here is post-recess. That is a highly specific inside the Beltway congressional term. That critical schedule lives exclusively on the highly restricted internal calendars of the 535 elected members of this body and their elite staff. A high-priced financial advisor who casually writes post-recess in a confidential investment strategy memo is undoubtedly reading a proprietary calendar that the vast majority of hardworking Americans absolutely do not have access to. He meticulously placed the financial memo squarely beside the internal scheduling document, perfectly aligning their edges side by side. The Congresswoman forcefully says she absolutely does not discuss pending legislative business with her husband. I believe her. But clearly, someone is actively reading the highly restricted congressional calendar and directly translating that inside information into immensely profitable investment advice. And that specific someone undeniably possesses VIP access to both sides of a regulatory wall that the Congresswoman insists firmly exists. He revealed a third damning page. The absolute truth is the Pelosi's share a single elite financial advisor. That specific advisor exclusively manages Paul Pelosi's massive investment portfolio and conveniently possesses unfettered access to the Speaker's publicly available schedule. There is absolutely no federal regulation that legally requires a high-level financial advisor to treat a powerful congressperson's spouse any differently from any regular client. He slowly closed the thin folder and placed it deliberately on top of the massive binder. The supposed impregnable wall between the Speaker's highly influential legislative work and her husband's wildly successful investment portfolio is not a wall at all. It is merely a window covered by a thin curtain. And that particular curtain has clearly been left wide open for a very, very long time. Pelosi leaned aggressively into her microphone, her legendary voice maintaining the terrifying steadiness of a load-bearing steel beam actively groaning under immense pressure. Mr. Speaker, I would like to formally and officially note for the congressional record that the wild characterizations being recklessly presented today are entirely speculative, that absolutely no official regulatory body has ever issued any formal finding of legal wrongdoing whatsoever, and that the dangerous conflation of routine public schedule information with criminal insider knowledge is a gross misrepresentation. Johnson didn't even bother to look up. The Congresswoman is technically correct that no federal regulatory body has formally issued a finding of wrongdoing. However, I feel compelled to officially note that no regulatory body has actually ever bothered to conduct an investigation in the first place. There is a massive, fundamental difference between being thoroughly cleared of wrongdoing and remaining completely unexamined. As any teacher knows, an ungraded test is not a passing grade. Part 5, Johnson plunged forward, aggressively reopening the heavy binder to the very last tab. The Congresswoman has famously positioned herself as one of the most historically vocal advocates for pure accountability in modern American politics. I genuinely want to honor that legacy by reading her own high-minded words out loud and then immediately following them by reading the precisely corresponding highly lucrative entries from her family's official financial disclosures. He began to read them in unyielding pairs, delivering each contradictory blow with the excruciating patience of a seasoned teacher dryly reading disastrous test results directly to an arrogant parent. The 18th of December, 2019. The Congresswoman solemnly delivers the historic articles of impeachment against the sitting president. Her exact words, "No one is above the law." That exact same month, Paul Pelosi aggressively purchases a staggering $500,000 in highly leveraged Apple call options, exactly 22 days before a major market-moving congressional antitrust hearing regarding tech monopolies that the Speaker's inner office had been extensively briefed on. Next, the 13th of January, 2021. The Congresswoman's righteous words echoing from the podium, "The president must be held fully accountable. No one is above accountability." During that exact same turbulent month, Paul Pelosi aggressively purchases massive tranches of call options on Tesla, CrowdStrike, and Alphabet. The combined leverage value of these trades sits somewhere between $2.5 million and $6 million. Next, March 2022, the Congresswoman passionately addresses the prestigious National Press Club. "We must diligently protect our fragile democracy from those who would corruptly abuse the massive power of public office for immense personal gain." During that exact same financial quarter, the Pelosi family portfolio predictably gains an astronomical $17 million in total value. Johnson quietly set the single page down, consciously leaving the heavy binder gaping open on the mahogany table. Linda Nakamura passionately teaches advanced economics directly inside the Congresswoman's home district. Last year, 3 of her brightest high school students boldly decided to use the massive Pelosi investment portfolio as the focal point for their rigorous AP economics case study. They painstakingly mapped every single publicly disclosed trade directly against the official behind closed doors legislative calendar. The silence in the room was absolute. The students' final conclusion, officially submitted for advanced placement college credit, was this: "The empirical data strongly suggests a definitive pattern of highly leveraged trades that consistently, miraculously outperform standard market indices in highly specific ways that perfectly correlate with restricted, non-public legislative information." 17-year-olds easily reached a deeply troubling, data-driven conclusion that absolutely no heavily funded federal regulatory body has ever been brave enough to reach. He slowly turned his full attention directly to Nancy Pelosi. "Madam Speaker, you loudly proclaim that absolutely no one is above the law. I sincerely believe that when you stood tall at that historic podium, you fiercely believed every single word you were saying. I am respectfully asking you to believe it right now as you sit at this table regarding everything contained inside this binder." Cornered, Pelosi frantically reached for her microphone, deploying every ounce of political survival instinct she possessed. "Mr. Speaker," she fired back, her voice ringing with manufactured indignation. "I have proudly and tirelessly served this hallowed institution for 35 years. I have bled and fought on the front lines for the Affordable Care Act. I have battled relentlessly for the rights of hardworking American families, and I will absolutely not sit here in this chair while my entire life's work is cheaply and viciously reduced to a simple spreadsheet." It was a legendary counterpunch, but Johnson did not flinch. "Madam Speaker," he replied softly, "I am absolutely not reducing your entire life's work to a spreadsheet. I am simply reading the spreadsheet. If your storied life's work and the stark mathematical reality of the spreadsheet happen to tell 2 entirely different contradictory stories, well, that is absolutely not my doing." The massive hearing room instantly plunged into an eerie, terrifying silence, the morbid silence of a crowded room helplessly watching a massive historic structure systematically lose its crucial load-bearing walls. Pelosi's perfectly manicured hands were tightly folded on the mahogany table, her posture defiantly upright, her facial expression ruthlessly composed, but the entire room could clearly see the immense, bone-crushing effort required to maintain the illusion. It was the tragic, haunting face of a desperate woman using all her strength to hold a heavy door firmly shut from the inside while a hurricane raged outside. Part 6, Johnson announced. Signaling the final phase, he deliberately and firmly closed the thick binder. The soft, dull collision of heavy cardboard covers meeting carried like a gunshot in the absolute suffocating silence. I want to close my testimony today with the core reason I ultimately accepted the Congresswoman's invitation to participate in this specific hearing. The Congresswoman proudly titled this hearing, Restoring Public Trust. I think the public's trust in the United States Congress is currently sitting at a tragic historic low of 17%. And I fundamentally believe it should viscerally concern every single elected person sitting in this room that a staggering 83 out of every 100 Americans absolutely do not trust the very people they explicitly elected to make their laws. He turned to gaze deeply into the unblinking lens of the main broadcast camera. And I say this with all due respect, but one of the primary reasons they simply don't trust us is currently sitting right here in this very room. I'm not explicitly saying the Congresswoman is overtly corrupt. I'm saying she arrogantly built an entire highly publicized hearing about trust while literally sitting comfortably on top of a massive binder completely full of undeniable reasons not to trust. The American people can viscerally feel the profound unfairness of it all, the exact same way you can instinctively feel that a wooden floor is deeply uneven long before you actually bend down to see where the broken boards fail to meet. In a final, devastating maneuver, he opened the thick binder one final time. The Congresswoman opened this hearing by proudly describing her personal political evolution on the vital issue of congressional stock trading. I have produced a final timeline here. The alleged evolution laid out chronologically 2011. The Congresswoman defiantly tells reporters, "We are a free market economy. Members should be able to participate in that." At that exact time, Paul Pelosi is actively, aggressively trading volatile individual stocks. 2012. 60 Minutes airs a massive segment on blatant congressional insider trading. Huge public outrage erupts. Feeling the heat, the Congresswoman openly supports the Stock Act. It miraculously passes 2013. A sneaky, quiet amendment is suddenly added to the Stock Act, effectively eliminating the vital requirement for a fully searchable online public database of members' financial disclosures. The Congresswoman's powerful office strictly does not actively oppose it. The devastating effect? To actually read these public disclosures, a normal citizen must physically travel to a specific government office building in Washington, D.C., solely during restricted business hours, and formally request physical paper copies. For a hard-working teacher struggling in San Francisco, that is absolutely not transparency. That is intentionally hiding the truth inside a dusty filing cabinet in a dark basement. 2021 through 2023. Massive, highly profitable trading seamlessly continues. 2024, under massive, renewed public pressure, specifically after a viral TikTok account tracking the Pelosi's stock trades explosively reaches 7 million followers, the Congresswoman suddenly announces she now fully supports sweeping new trading restrictions. He contemptuously set the damning timeline down. This alleged evolution follows an extremely predictable, cynical pattern. Tough restrictions are fiercely opposed when the trading is highly profitable. Restrictions are suddenly loudly supported only when the massive public pressure is boiling over. And the moment that intense public pressure inevitably fades, the tough restrictions are quietly, systematically weakened in the shadows. That is absolutely not evolution. It is a calculated, vicious cycle. Every single time the public actively looks closely, you feign support for reform, and every single time the public eventually looks away, you immediately resume aggressive trading. He permanently closed the heavy binder one final time. In my old high school classroom, we had a very specific word for a student who only bothered to follow the established rules when they knew the teacher was directly watching them. He deliberately did not say the explosive word out loud. The agonizingly blank space was infinitely louder and far more devastating than the actual word ever could have been. Desperate for a lifeline, Pelosi abruptly turned to her immediate left, desperately seeking the physical presence of her loyal deputy, Marcus. But the leather chair was completely empty. Marcus had quietly, abruptly vanished exactly 9 minutes ago, executing the rapid, measured exit of a seasoned political operative who suddenly realized he needed to make a frantic emergency phone call that absolutely could not wait. The high-definition broadcast cameras mercilessly recorded the legendary, unshakable Speaker of the House helplessly turning to her left and finding absolutely no one. Out in the echoing marble hallway, far from the cameras, Marcus stood frantically with his smartphone pressed hard against his ear. I urgently need outside, independent legal counsel physically in this building, he hissed into the receiver. And absolutely not the usual congressional ethics people. I need a hardcore, specialized securities attorney. Because she has a live press avail in exactly 45 minutes. And if she recklessly goes out there and arrogantly says no one is above the law one more damn time inside a building where there is now a massive, heavily documented binder fundamentally proving that someone clearly is, we are going to have a catastrophic problem. This is no longer a PR issue. This is a massive legal problem. Get me a damn lawyer. Now, he aggressively hung up the phone. Inside, the pale, shaken committee chair slowly raised his wooden gavel and tapped it exactly once. This hearing is adjourned, he croaked. As the suffocating atmosphere of the hearing room shattered into panicked whispers, a cornered Nancy Pelosi bypassed the main exit, retreating down the restricted staff corridor and completely abandoning her meticulously crafted 60-page defensive dossier on the mahogany table. Its brightly color-coded plastic tabs remain pristine and untouched, serving as a glaring, deeply expensive monument to a carefully rehearsed political strategy that had just been utterly dismantled on live television. The institutional fallout was immediate, merciless, and impossible to contain. Within a mere 48 hours, the Securities and Exchange Commission formally slapped her elite financial advisor with a terrifying document preservation notice, forcing the panicked operative to instantly retain specialized legal counsel as the threat of federal probes loomed. Concurrently, a sweeping bipartisan stock trading ban dubbed the Clarity Act aggressively advanced through the House, yet Pelosi's legendary name was glaringly omitted from the co-sponsor list, a deafening institutional condemnation that echoed through the halls of Washington. The bleeding only worsened as the Wall Street Journal plastered the radioactive details of her family's financial arrangements across its front page, flawlessly recreating Mike Johnson's brutal two-column chart for the world to see, while devastating internal polling in her hyper-liberal San Francisco stronghold revealed a staggering 22-point plummet in her strong approval rating. Desperate to regain control of the narrative, Pelosi orchestrated a tense 8-minute appearance on CNN, but her practiced deflections and absolute refusal to address the massive NVIDIA or Visa trades only exposed a hollow, terrified defense, a heavily fortified door with absolutely no lock. But the true world-shattering impact of that fateful hearing didn't just rattle Washington. It struck at the very heart of her own district on a foggy Monday morning, where veteran economics teacher Linda Nakamura unzipped her battered canvas bag, and placed her own heavily annotated Office Depot binder onto her desk. Facing 28 exhausted high school students and the exact same mundane teaching materials that Johnson had just weaponized to humiliate a political titan, Linda and her brilliantly perceptive student, Kevin, finally confronted the brutal, unspoken reality hidden in the blank space of their market regulation charts. The American financial system is not magically designed to be fair, but rather fiercely engineered to reward the elites who possess restricted insider information. It is a chilling systemic truth perfectly mirrored outside their classroom window, where the dense California fog intentionally cloaks the towering financial penthouses where massive leveraged trades are secretly executed, leaving only the gritty ground floor visible to the ordinary citizens struggling to survive below. But as this protective institutional fog finally begins to evaporate and federal crosshairs aggressively lock on to the Pelosi portfolio, you have to ask yourself, with the SEC rapidly closing in, her political firewall crumbling to ash, and her loyal allies vanishing into the shadows, what catastrophic hidden trades will the impending federal subpoenas violently expose, and who is the next untouchable Washington titan about to face their own devastating public reckoning?